here, Fanatic Perspective. Still wrestling with my voice a little bit, trying to get back on track here. But I appreciate y'all joining this morning and sticking with us as we had some difficulties last night on my part. But we are back here live with a special guest. Guys, it's Bama week. And as we get prepped and we want to be informed, I want to talk to the guys out there and the ladies and gents out there that are knowledgeable like we are here in Longhorn Nation as we get prepped for a very, very big game in Austin this week. So we welcome Mr. Jance Sports to the show. Jance, what's good, brother? How you doing this morning?
Man, I'm doing all right, man. I'm down. Talk some football, man. I'm exhausted from yesterday. Obviously, yesterday's game was insane, but now I'm ready to down and talk some ball, man. Talk some Texas Bama. Man, I'm ready to go for this week.
We are going to be Texas Bama heavy today. Now, and as Jance just teased, we'd be remiss if we didn't start with last night's wild LSU-FSU game in New Orleans. Some voodoo, some nonsense was going on in the Superdome. But first, I do want to give a quick shout out and thank you to our sponsor, BUSR, BUSR.com/Fanatic, the official sports book, the official betting partner of Fanatic Perspective. Y'all know what time it is. Hit up BUSR.com/Fanatic. You can take advantage of that Sports 100 FP promo code. Look, I know a lot of people had LSU -4 last night, but overall in college football, I felt like it was a good day again for our favorites. Georgia going strong, Alabama, everybody, right? Oklahoma was able to cover. So, overall it was a pretty good day. Now, the big games like Notre Dame and Ohio State and some of those others, Notre Dame came through. But all of that on BUSR.com/Fanatic. Let's take advantage. So, Jance, before we get into our teams and we start kind of, exchanging information, if you will, last night was chaos, bro. We can't be content creators and not touch on one of the most absurd, crazy, drunk endings I've ever seen in a football game. What say you? That the LSU team, Jance, those are your rivals and everything. So talk to us, brother.
I see, this is where LSU always makes me a fool, because every single year when I always make my prediction stuff like that, I always consider LSU to be the biggest threat to Bama, because that's how it's always kind of been. That Les Miles, Nick Saban rivalry, then it kind of carried on to what Ed Orgeron was able to do. But if you look at just players that are always going to the NFL, as far as NFL production, like it's Alabama first, and then it's LSU second. I mean, it's these two teams when it just comes to the equivalency of talent. Like, even though when you look at the 24/7 rankings or On3 or whatever recruiting site you want to look at, Alabama's always either number 1 or number 2. Worst case scenario, they're number 5, and LSU is all over the place. But that state of the state of Louisiana alone, they don't really need anybody else. It's always just been locking up that particular state, which LSU has done a great job of. But I mean, the talent discrepancy between these two it's not that far apart. And to see what this program has become over the last 3 years is just shocking. I had LSU winning at least 9 games in the regular season. I had them upsetting A&M. I actually had us having 1 loss this year, and that was to LSU, because you're playing in a very difficult environment, which is Baton Rouge, just a game that they're always up for. And even last year LSU was also another down year for them, and we should have lost that game to LSU last year. We should have lost. So it's crazy. And with the amount of talent that's coming back, Mason Smith, Jaquelin Roy, BJ Ojolari, and Ali Gay, and Makai Wingo from Missouri, and they pick up all these really good transfer players. They picked up 2 corners from they picked up a corner and a safety from
Harold Perkins in there too.
Yeah, I mean, my God, Harold Perkins, all those guys. I mean, it's just, there is no way that LSU with the performance that they added yesterday, there is just no way. I couldn't believe what I was able to see. I mean, it
looks like the milk has already gone bad in the locker room too. After the game, we got all these receivers, taking LSU, all the pictures and all the stuff off of their accounts. I don't know if it's because of all the backlash from the fans. I asked myself this question yesterday. Would I prefer to lose that game if I was an LSU fan going through that type of trauma real time? Would I have just rather died with the Malik Neighbors fumble for the punt and then FSU just ices the game, or lose in the manner in which you get this miracle fumble with Mike Norvell and them just being idiots, right? And then they go 98 yards, and then we lose on a blocked extra point, and it's like, what's more that to me?
I
That's
don't
even
know, man.
more painful.
I don't know, man, because that was the second month punt. That was the second month punt that he had. I don't like the first one. Okay, you know what? Mistakes happen. Hopefully you can get that back. But it happened to him again, and then two blocked. I mean, it is rare. People, if you don't understand this, it is rare for field goals and extra points to be blocked. It's really rare. I mean, when you look at the rates of kicks getting blocked compared to what it used to be back in the day, compared to what it is now. I mean, it is rare for it to happen not once but twice. But it's unbelievable because it was failed execution from the offensive standpoint, the defensive standpoint, and special teams. I mean, it was horrific, and it's something that you just don't really see LSU teams do, even with the horrible mess that was Ed Orgeron, the first 3 games in 2016 when LSU lost to Wisconsin, which was the ceiling point where they fired Les Miles and hired Ed Orgeron to be the interim head coach. I mean, throughout all the mess that's been going on, I mean, a lot of those mistakes, I never thought it would happen. I never thought it would happen, and that game was insane, Steve. I mean, both teams, they didn't want to win. Like both teams,
right? Nobody wanted to win. Nobody wanted to win. I was watching the game. I ended up getting able to check the game out at my parents-in-law's house, and they were saying the same thing. They were like, nobody wants to win this game. This is reckless behavior on both teams, guys. And now we're in a situation where as we transition into our teams and whatnot, because I do want to focus on that. Right off the bat, every year I feel like we get exposed to special teams, and I know there's so much to key in on the star power, quite frankly, on both Texas and Alabama. Alabama's number one because of the depth and just the overall talent, top to bottom on y'all's roster with a proven coach like Nick Saban. But the top end guys, whether it's Bijan or Xavier Worthy or Bryce Young and Will Anderson, there's a lot of names in this game, right? But I want to start on special teams because last week Texas blocks a punt, which is something we're starting to become known for. And you're very familiar with Jeff Banks and what they do on that side of the unit. And, if we're looking for us as Texas fans, we're trying to look for the chink in the armor, right, Jance? And, correct me if I'm wrong, there was a block punt in the Utah State game, right? And so I'm looking for, just try to find some things. Going into this, could Texas potentially at home, early morning kickoff, could we potentially try to get a spark via special teams for Texas? Who knows?
It potentially could be. I mean, and that was kind of one of the biggest question marks was our punting unit. We haven't. It's not been bad, but ever since J.K. Scott and ever since we had J.K. Scott, ever since he kind of left, it's kind of just been up in the air. The 2019 was probably the last year where our special teams unit, at least for the punting side of it, was not that good. We averaged low 39 yards per punt. And ever since then, it's been 41, 42 yards, which has been okay. It's not particularly been a huge detriment to our team. But that is one area
that much.
That's probably one area of weakness, which is still a little bit of a question mark. Obviously the block punt from what Utah State did, and that was kind of a miscue by Jalen Moody. You let the dude strictly just come inside. But that's something that I don't want that to happen, of course, but that will be a big spark. If Texas was somehow able to block a punt or maybe block a field goal, I think that's going to create a huge spark. I mean, in the national championship game, we had a blocked field goal, which in my opinion, turn the game around, right? Because right off the gate, what happened? James Cook pops off a 70-yard run. They end up scoring a touchdown, and that's when the game swung, right? And that was because Devontae Wyatt blocked the field goal. So, it's not particularly a weakness, but it's something that we have to keep an eye on because we all know Jeff Banks. Jeff Banks is a really good special teams coordinator and excellent recruiter. And for the most part, I can see for the most part a lot of these coaches really amping up special teams to play a big major part because you need a spark. I definitely think that a spark and changing the guard, changing the momentum, getting the crowd noise into it that much often, I think will be huge.
I was at the game this week, and I was fortunate where I was sitting where that block punt by Deshaun Jameson, house call by Keelan Robinson, occurred on my side of the field, and I was screaming as soon as they put the unit on the field, like, Keelan, go get one, Keelan, go get one. And it ended up being, Deshaun Jameson coming through and blocking that. And one of the reasons why it's, again, the LSU Florida State game, you mentioned the national championship game. It's one of these things where nobody pays attention to it until it becomes a massive thing. And that emotional swing in these games is ridiculous. Mm-hmm. It's ridiculous. So, I just wanted to kind of start there. There's going to be a lot of storylines this week. You mentioned Jeff Banks, the big one, right? Steve Sarkisian, Nick Saban. Nick Saban against his former assistants has been, untouchable until Kirby and Jimbo last year, right? And so now, we have this opportunity. Nick Saban at one point was talked about coming to Austin a long time ago. There's so many back and forths. Kyle Flood in the mix here. The transfers like Ajayi Hall. We know Billingsley won't play with the 6-game suspension now, which, thanks a lot, Jance. And all the things that are happening. What storylines are you keying on in here? And as you guys are here in the chat before Jance answers, let me know what storylines y'all are paying attention to this week, or, really what you're looking forward to seeing play out in this matchup of Texas versus Alabama. Jance, what are you paying attention to now?
I'm paying attention to Ja'Tavion Sanders. Ja'Tavion Sanders is our linebacking core, especially when it comes to, and including our star position player, which for those who do not know what our star is, that's basically kind of our nickel / hybrid safety. So Malachi Moore, Brian Branch would share that sometimes. But Ja'Tavion Sanders, and I talked about this to a lot of you Texas fans back in the during the preseason. I said the key for Texas, or one of the biggest keys, is the tight end position, because if there's one particular position that frequently time for time will tear Bama up, it is that tight end, right? It's dealing with those athletic tight ends, guys that are really, really great route runners, guys that understand the key position of how to play a receiver. Those type of hybrid guys we've kind of struggled to deal with a little bit. Jalen Whittemire was a guy that kind of torched us for 3 straight years. Brock Bowers was another guy that you can just name off the top of your head a little bit there. So it's just, that's one particular position that I'm a little nervous of. Again, Jalen Moody, for the most part, he's a run stopping guy. That's a guy that, for the most part, little different from how Christian Harris played. Christian Harris was more of that blitzing linebacker, really athletic, sideline to sideline, but more of that blitzing, that extra pass rush we needed. Now that we have Jalen Moody at inside, that's more of your prototypical run stopping, linebacker, right? He's not really a sideline to sideline type of guy. That's more Henry T's job. But last year, one of our biggest weaknesses was we couldn't really fill in the gaps. We struggled with physicality until late in the season, where we started, we had to, pick that up. But Jalen Moody is natural. He's a bruiser type of linebacker. So I'm interested that in situations, especially because Steve Sarkisian utilized the tight end, which was Jalil Billingsley, it was Cameron Latu, what he did in 2020. He utilized that, especially when Jalen Waddle went down and we ran a lot of 12, and it worked in our benefit, because we saw those mismatches and we took advantage of those opportunities. So I know that one particular position that Steve Sarkisian will love to utilize. I wouldn't be surprised at all that in this game you guys run some 12. Despite, even though Jalil's going to be out for this game, I wouldn't be surprised at all if that happens, only because you want to see, okay, even though we like Malachi Moore, he's more of a zone coverage type of guy, playmaker, but he's not that particularly, he's not that exceptional in man. Brian Branch is a phenomenal run stopper, but he's not that dude at man. He's just not. He's, that's a guy that you could potentially beat. Where can we find those particular matchups? And Ja'Tavion Sanders, with his athleticism at 6'5", 260 pounds, has that huge frame. At Ryan, he played all over the place, including where they had him out wide, so he understands how to play the receiving position. That is a position, and especially because we've seen 80 yards in the from last week for you guys. So that's a key weapon that I'm highlighting. That's something that I'm interested in seeing, because Henry T, Jalen Moody, and Malachi and Brian, those are not their strengths, is particularly those one-on-one engagements. So I wouldn't be surprised at all in this game if we maybe have some help to try to figure out how we can slow down a player like Ja'Tavion Sanders.
Justin Yarbrough, thank you for the super chat. Appreciate it. Said, I want to see how the guys can compete. We want a championship. We want to be a championship program. Here's our chance to see that talent firsthand. Absolutely. It's a litmus test. And that's why I'm so thrilled to have this game again with our young guys. So one of the common ones here that I've seen in the chat a few times mentioned, and again, thank you, Justin, for your super chat. Completely agree. Completely agree with you. But Braden, was the last one, so I'm going to put Braden's up on here. Kelvin Banks. We saw Kelvin Banks make his debut last week. Had a little injury, scare. Was able to jump right back into the game. And, for the most part, now I haven't, I got to do it another film analysis, but I really liked what we saw from, now granted ULM, what challenges do they present or anything like that. Now we jump up to the golden tier. Now we jump up to one of the best college football, not just defensive ends, but overall pass rush. From what you guys do, Will Anderson, all these guys up front, this matchup's going to be insanely key, right? And on top of that, behind Kelvin Banks, we have a young quarterback who's still filling his way out. So it's going to be very, very interesting, how that's done. I mean, it seemed like Will Anderson against Utah State. I know he didn't, register a sack, but the disruption is there literally every play. And Utah State's running the veer and shoot, and y'all just tore that up. Right? Like it just didn't matter. For those who aren't familiar, Tennessee runs that. I believe the brother came from Josh Heupel's offense. Oklahoma's running that now. Ole Miss ran it last year. Arkansas runs their version with Kendall Browse. So what we saw Alabama do in terms of just immediate pressure, shutting down those seams. You heard Jance talking about linebacker coverage and just tackling in space. These are very, very interesting matchups. Man coverage underneath. Who were some of my quick hitters for a guy like a Quinn Ewers, right? So I'm looking at Jordan Whittington in this game, who was very, very quiet in week one. And it seemed like Ewers really had that connection going with Jatavian Sanders. But a guy like a Jordan Whittington, some of the things like RPO that y'all are very familiar with Sark, and some of the weaknesses that could be there with Bama, that's somebody on the inside in the slot that I think could potentially help us out in, whenever we do go more 11 personnel. So these matchups are going to be crazy this week, man.
Yeah, man. And it's, you talked about the defensive line before, man. And believe it or not, I actually kind of was a little mad at our defensive line because we didn't really give our secondary an opportunity to kind of showcase and kind of shine. So for those who don't know, we actually don't have a certified number one or number two at the outside cornerback position. It's actually kind of a battle right now. So it's Eli Ricks, it's Kool-Aid, it's Terrian Arnold. It's Terrian Arnold, and then it's Kyrie Jackson. Those guys are battling right now to see who's gonna solidify that starter. So we had co-starters, and they would switch in every so often. But because our front seven pretty much just completely destroyed them, we didn't see that much. The only thing that we saw that maybe could be, that maybe we saw from a hole that, we can say, okay, maybe we need to clean this up, was that we got beat a lot on inside slants. Like we got beat a lot on inside slants, and it was basically just single coverage, right? We didn't really have any safety help. We didn't really have any linebackers fall that much into coverage. It was pretty much, we got beat on the inside slant, and sometimes, and their quarterback just really couldn't really identify some of that. There were some times where he did hit it. There were some other times where he didn't. And really the one guy that was getting beat was Eli Ricks, which is the one guy that a lot of Bama fans thought that, or still think to this day that maybe he can be that next Patrick Surtain. But he was the one he got beat a couple times, right? They actually kind of missed a little bit of a holding call on a little bit of a go route. So we're still uncertain, which in a way worries me a little bit, because now we're going against a Texas receiving core, which even though they lost Isaiah Nayer, you still have Xavier Worthy, who is one of the best receivers in the country.
So pause right there, Jance.
Mm-hmm.
Got a question from my buddy Trey on here. Shout out to Trey, who I'm sure you cut it up with in spaces too, from time to time. But Trey wants to know who's going to travel with Zay out of that group you just mentioned.
I honestly, that's the tricky part, because it's gonna be four dudes playing. So,
Got you. So y'all are still really, really
like,
working
we
through
don't
that.
know. Yeah, we don't know. Matter of fact, Nick Saban, he actually went on a rant about it, about the depth chart that was released and then the players that were played. We don't know yet. So
Thank
maybe
you for leading me. Sorry, thank you for leading me to the depth chart conversation because a lot of this started not with Nick. I mean, that's a separate thing, but we've been having this conversation here in Texas world, right? Because Steve Sarkisian did not release a depth chart before the season started for ULM,
Mhm.
and basically said, guys are still competing. I don't have a depth chart to give y'all, so you may not get one this whole season, and
Yeah.
left it at that. And there was a big hullabaloo and story and all this type of stuff. And Nick goes off yesterday. I wouldn't even say goes off, but just basically was like, "Hey, I know you mentioned the situation with your guard there, and how many days guys practice and all these things that he just didn't really particularly care to disclose." And he's like, "Well, the problems came after I disclosed it to y'all," which I found fascinating. And so this whole
Oh, yep. It's like it. You see what this Nick Saban's like. You see what happens when I actually disclose my depth chart to see what happens. Like a lot of people are like, why is Kendall Randolph starting at guard? Which he's a 6-year player. Like, why is he there? What's happening with Javon Cohen? And like, well, if Javon Cohen, he's battling obviously the mental issues. He kind of disclosed how he's been in rehab because the pressures of what it takes to be a student athlete, and that's just kind of got to him a little bit. Last year he was our starter at that same particular position. But yeah, a lot of people were confused, like, why is he there? And then, obviously Kendall Randolph, he didn't really have the best game against Utah State in the run department. So a lot of people kind of got him on that. Some people were still confused why we still had co-starters instead of actually naming the particular starters. What's going on with Eli Ricks? And Nick Saban was like, dude, you got to calm down. We're still competing. Everything. We're going to disclose our actual full roster when it's actually ready. Until then, just chill out.
Yeah, no, Braden said, how have we not mentioned Bryce Young yet? Because everybody's going to talk about Bryce Young all week, and we are going to talk about Bryce Young too. But I actually wanted to start in reverse, because of what happened last night in the LSU-FSU game, what we saw this weekend from these teams. It's the hidden stuff that's going on. We'll get to Bryce in a second because, we haven't talked about Quinn Ewers. We haven't talked about any of the big time guys. We're kind of nerding out right now with the unknowns and the unsungs within this game, because from a Texas standpoint, I look at our defense last week. We feel as though we played as well as we possibly could have with our first and second units in there, at least the guys that are competing for time. We're disappointed we gave up a touchdown, but the folks that gave that up, I don't expect them to really have an impact or play many snaps in this game. But just the overall disruption and improvement I saw from my defensive line, knowing, the challenges that Alabama had with your offensive line last year, and Bryce looked to be a lot more mobile. So now that we're bringing up Bryce, but guys like Vernon Broughton on our end, I was just so impressed with their movement. Baron Sorrell, we actually felt like for the first time and in such a long time, we could organically get to the quarterback. I mean, that was something we struggled to do last year against bad competition. When we played bad teams, we still struggled to just generate any type of pass rush if we weren't blitzing or we weren't sending, double A gap pressure, right? And so being able to generate that with 3 down, 4 down, and some of our packages, some of our looks, I'm excited to see that matchup for Texas because Bryce Young, in terms of containing him, he's such a playmaker, right? And so I need to have some sort of confusion on the back end, or at least, he's cerebral. He's making all these checks at the line of scrimmage, which you don't see often from college quarterbacks with that much responsibility that he has at the line of scrimmage. It's almost like a chess match with PK, right? In terms of what can I show on the back end, but PK can't do any of that if we don't have wins with the guys I just mentioned up front, and our big boys continue to play the way that they played last week. Do you want to speak to the offensive line? Or do you want to speak to Bryce? Where do you want to go?
I can touch upon the offensive line because that is the one weakness of our team. That was what stopped us from winning a national championship was, in my opinion, the offensive line. I guess like this, the last year, including entering to this one, we've never really had this situation since the John Parker Wilson days where our offensive line could genuinely be a little bit of a concern. Now, it wasn't particularly bad last year, but it wasn't really great. I mean, we were one of the worst teams as far as protecting the quarterback. We allowed some of the most pressures in the SEC. We just weren't good. I've always said this before, and maybe some people may call me biased. I said Bryce Young had one of the most impressive Heismans I think I've ever seen in my life, only because of the situation he had to deal with his offensive line. And it's just like that. I mean, you look at some of the past Heisman Trophy, like Baker Mayfield had a godly, incredible offensive line. Joe Burrow, for the most part, Joe Burrow, I know Cam Newton, those are guys that are exceptions. Lamar Jackson, you can also throw his name in there as well. But what Bryce really had to do with that offensive line, it was not clean. Because with the exception of Evan Neal on the outside, who was obviously a top 5 pick, we had to move our starting center at right tackle and Chris Owens because we had no depth at right tackle. It was either him or Damian George. No answer at all. Our guard position were too young. Our center position was questionable. And now a lot of those same players will be back for this game, which brings me to the point of against, this is the matchup that I think this is going to be won, right? And you brought up some of those names. You brought up the Burrells. You brought up the Broughtons. Byron Murphy. A lot of Texas fans have talked to me a lot about the potential of what Byron Murphy could have if they utilize him right. Keandre Coburn, we can't really forget about him and the utilization of that defensive line. Our offensive line, this is going to be a test we're going to see, because in that Utah State game, even though we blew them out, we had, incredible 41 points in the first and everything, we struggled with the inside stunts in the run game. That's what we struggled with. And we lost, and we did lose some of those one-on-one matchups, right? Darian Delcourt wasn't perfect, even though I do believe in the run department, he is extremely aggressive, and that's a pancaking dude, but he's not perfect. Kendall Randolph at left guard, there's a reason why he's never started a game in his career. There's a reason why, for the most part, he's always been a rotational guy. Matter of fact, before that, his role was on special teams as that backup tight end whenever we had our big boy package on the goal line situations. Now we have him as a 6-year player, as a graduate player, as a starting left guard. That could potentially be an issue because he did struggle in that first game. Right. Emil Ekiyor had a down year from 2021. Matter of fact, he lost 40 pounds. I think around 30 or 40 pounds. But we saw some weaknesses. We saw him get pushed back a lot in the backfield. We saw him deal with.
Is he healthy now?
Yeah. So I believe he is healthy. He did look a little quicker. He did look a little mobile, but he still seems like he needs to kind of find his rhythm. He needs to find his ground, which again, against Texas, I don't want that to happen. I want him to find his ground. I want him to be as 100% as sharp as possible. But one of the biggest criticisms about Emil was he good because of the offensive line he had to work with when he had Landon Dickerson and he worked with Evan Neal at right tackle? Or is he really an overrated player? Was he really even that good at all? So we're going to find out, because he's going to deal with a lot better players than what he had in Utah State. But we did struggle a little bit in some pass pro a little bit earlier on. We did struggle a little bit with our run stunts in the first half. It is something that is going to be a key because it's not as clear, right? A lot of people like to say, well, Alabama's going to win the national championship. They're going to go undefeated. They're going to blow out everyone they play against. Well, I say we're not invincible. We have areas, we have holes that if the right team, if we do play against the right team, they could expose us. That's what LSU did to us last year. That's what Auburn did to us last year. That's what A&M did to us last year. That's what Florida did to us in the second half, where we honestly could have lost that game. So I looked at go ahead.
So, Jance, let me ask you this, though, because I know on Spaces and other platforms, even YouTube, guys, make sure you go check. I'll have the link too. So you guys go and subscribe and support Jance Sports on YouTube. We want to make sure our content creators out here are growing. We're going to have some more content. Hopefully we'll talk more of this later this week as we really get into more predictions and things of that sort. Right now, this is just filling out each other's teams, how we're going to look on Saturday. But going back to this offseason, you've gotten pushback in your own community because people feel you're the how should I say, you're the person that's the contrarian in the Bama fan base, the person that is, the glass is half, what is it? The glass is half empty versus half full, right? And so, a lot of, now you said you expect them to lose one game this year, so it's not like you're this like, oh, doom and gloom, Bama's overrated type person. But do you want to speak to your reputation there before we continue this breakdown?
Yeah, so a lot of people kind of call me like, one of the, I guess, the how can I say, like, I guess the fake one, the fake Bama fan, etc. Like I receive a lot of names, but I'm one of those people that I just deliver the truth, right? What I see on the field is exactly how I'm going to say it.
I
Listen,
respect that.
yeah, like, listen, I get it. I'm a Bama fan. We win a lot of games. I guess you can call me spoiled in that way, but I'm one of those people that say, listen, there's an expectation that's been set, very similar to how Texas was back in the day when Texas, when they won 10, 11 games, competing for national championships every single year. Whenever you guys don't really deliver, there's like, okay, what happened here? What's going on? How can we address this? How can we fix this? Like, there was a level of expectation that was set by the previous teams, by your predecessors. Now we got to follow in our footsteps. We can't just, we this is not Texas football, or this is not Bama football. This is not how the way we do it. And that's just how I am. I trust me, I do it with all my teams. I do it with my Bills. I do it with every single team I cover. I talk about that in that way. So for us last year, just the way that how we were, like and Steven, I'm going to say this. I'm not trying to be spoiled here. We should have been 8-4 last year. Easily should have been 8-4 last year. We should have lost to LSU. We should have lost to Auburn. The Arkansas game, you can make an argument for. The Florida game, we did actually lose to A&M. And then, of course, the Florida game was a game that we honestly could have lost to, because we got outplayed. Really, we dominated one quarter and lost all three. So we didn't really have that good of a year. And that's just something that we have not seen. I mentioned the offensive line. We weren't used to having the level of just it was bad on the offensive line last year. We're not used to that. We just came off of having a Joe Moore winning offensive line. We just came off of continuously adding in first round picks, at least second round picks, 3-4 dudes in the offensive line getting drafted. Now you look at this year, we're projected to maybe having one, maybe two, and that's Tyler Steen from Vanderbilt. So
Right.
it's like that's the expectation. And again, if I see us not playing to our full potential, I'm gonna call out for it.
So I'm seeing, and I appreciate you, clearing that up. We don't have to stick there or anything. Or just, and that we all have them in our fan base when people say things that are like, hey, you don't seem to have as much confidence as everybody else.
Yeah.
I think it's healthy, right? We don't want to have groupthink here. That's why we have these discussions. And I think one of the reasons why I'm glad you're on the show is you're able to validate what you're seeing, right? Whether folks agree or disagree with you, like, hey, these are my data points to support why I feel the way that I feel. So, it's more than fair. So I want to address one other thing here that I'm seeing in the comments mentioned, because a lot of you folks, as we talk about Sark, and I'm seeing, various messages here, comment that I pinned. Let me see. So I'm seeing messages here about the playbook and Sark and all this stuff about hiding things and, whatnot. And we'll get to comparisons with coaches. But guys, listen, Sark is not going to come up with some brand new playbook or things we've never seen before just for Alabama. And guess what? Bill O'Brien and Nick Saban are not going to come up with some brand new playbook and concepts for Texas. They'll have certain wrinkles installed this week. They'll have certain concepts, and they may have certain formation packages that they haven't shown yet this season or anything like that will be tailored game plan wise. But our offense is our offense. We ran it last week. We ran a lot of deep posts. We ran a lot of deep crossers. We ran the same route combinations that you saw Xavier Worthy eat up OU with. It's the same plays. Now, the sequence in which we call it and things of that sort, or, some of the RPO stuff or play action stuff we did with Jatavian Sanders. I mean, some of those things are also by design for prepping for your opponent against ULM. That just worked. That happened to run that concept because the defense that ULM runs is what that is. And we won't run that against Bama because Bama runs a different defense, right? And so I'm more concerned, and this is why I've said when we play teams like this, and I'm glad Texas did this, run your offense, right? If you run at a certain tempo, don't change it up just because you're playing, ULM or whoever. Now, you may want to throw some bait out there on tape, sure. But with guys that know each other as well as these staffs do, It's about execution. So, I see Isaac talking about hitting with Worthy, all those things. Like, y'all are going to run a lot of man coverage, Jance.
That's
Are
what
y'all going to come out and start playing, cover 3 and having robbers and all sorts of stuff? Like, just start doing something you've never done before. Like y'all are going to play man coverage. You're going to rely on Will Anderson and Dallas Turner. I saw Braswell back, by the way. He was out there shaking it too. I was like, damn, Braswell's out there getting after it. Like that, this is an execution game, is my point. I don't have to get cute if I have Will Anderson. I don't have to get cute. My whole point is to try to isolate him one-on-one on a matchup because I know he's going to win, hell of a lot of times. Now, to me, more of the wrinkles and more of the mystery is with how I use certain personnel. So from the Texas standpoint, and I'll go first, one of my X factor guys in this game is actually more of a DeMarvion Overshown, okay? Because a guy like a DeMarvion Overshown, who is now playing at multiple levels in our defense, sometimes he's a primary pass rusher, sometimes now he's dropping off. You guys threw a lot to a Jace McClellan, a Williams out of the backfield. Y'all had a lot of concepts where y'all were, kind of killing those swing routes out in the flats. We do similar stuff with Bijan and Keelan Robinson and all those guys.
Yeah, Roshan.
So really it's just going to come down to how we execute our coverage to cover that. But y'all are not going to stop running those concepts because you're playing Texas, and we're not going to stop running those, jet motion or orbit motion concepts that we do with Keelan and Zay just because we're playing Bama. It's who is going to execute it. And so that's unless you disagree, Jance. I mean, am I talking about blowing smoke here?
No. I mean, for the most part, one of the things that I honestly believe that could, I honestly would love to see Texas do it is I would love to see Texas be aggressive, and if I'm just take off the Alabama, clothing, the jersey and stuff like that off. If I'm PK, I'm like, I want to test these receivers. I want to test this offensive line because this was not a perfect offensive line. Matter of fact, whenever we struggle, one of our biggest struggles, which one of the games that I love to implement is LSU and Auburn. Those are two teams that, for the most part, just stack the box. That's what Auburn particularly did, right? They stacked the box until there was a point where they say, you know what, their offensive line can't handle our front four. Let's just take everybody off and let's just see what happens because at this point, we're killing them with 4. Before that, Auburn pretty much ran that game, 5-6 dudes, continuously sent pressure because they wanted to say, okay, you know what? I want to see how good Jamison Williams is. I want to see how good John Mechie is. I want to see how good Bryce Young is in this offensive line. Can they handle the pressure? Because what we've seen so far in tape is that you can't handle it. Let's see what happens. And ultimately, we had literally 4 games that you can point out to, including the Georgia game, the national championship, where we struggle with those particular situations. Now, Bryce Young can, he can dissect any defense. I mean, we've seen Georgia in the SC championship game, but that's kind of been one of the biggest critiques in that game was why wasn't Georgia as aggressive compared to what they were, in the national championship game? Was it because the quote unquote they had the flu and Jordan Davis was just out of shape, or was it just because of bad strategy? Did Georgia, were they playing their game? And when you look at the previous games, Georgia was extremely aggressive, especially with their linebacking core. Now in this game, they seem to play a little bit more conservative. So for the most part, again, Texas, play your game. I mean, don't try to do anything that you've never really tried that much before. For the most part, it's all about really execution, right? It's all about practicing what you preach. It's all about execution. And I think for this particular game, I think we're going to see some things. I think we're going to see some things potentially that maybe we haven't seen before. Hopefully, that maybe can work in our favor. But I think for the most part, I mean, you mentioned it. You got speed at linebacker. I mean, Demarion Overshown is a freak of a linebacker. I actually think he's going to be more of a hybrid safety when he gets to the NFL. But I think he's a freak athlete. I think you have some defensive linemen that maybe we haven't really seen produce that much besides what we've seen last week. But we also have an offensive line that, even though it's not particularly bad, it's not great. It's not what it used to be. Like, if we're just living in reality and stop the wishful hoping, if I'm just taking off the Bama bias off a little bit, we're not as good as we used to be up front in the offensive line. That's just reality. I think, and that's why I have us losing a game this year, because we're not perfect at that particular position. So it's going to be interesting, but it's all about execution. It's all about following your flows. It's all about executing. And I think for the most part, if Texas can do that, I think that we could see some frustrating things, or as we saw at film and tape, we saw some particular situations where Bryce Young got a little frustrated, where Bryce Young doesn't, because he's known for being a cool dude, but there are situations where he does lose a little bit of his cool whenever our offense is not properly executing that much.
I do think he would have, if J-Mo doesn't go down in the national championship game. I do think there's some, maybe they don't win, but I do think he figures out how to, I don't know. I mean, I think there is some unknowns there. I did like what I saw from Trayshawn Holden last week against Utah State, really just being so in sync with Bryce Young, especially because Bryce Young plays so much like an NFL quarterback in terms of the freedom that he seems to have. And I think sometimes that can, from a pass blocking perspective, that can actually throw off your offensive line a little bit, because he's holding, or he may move in a certain way that breaks our scheme, right? But he's trying to be more creative. And because he's so good doing that on and off script, that it's, sometimes it's like, oh, well, I thought you were slanting this way. And he steps into where I'm trying to move the pressure to. You see what I'm saying? So you see that sometimes with any type of quarterback that plays in the manner of Bryce Young. But seeing how Trayshawn Holden was moving, seeing the connection with a Jermaine Burton right off the bat, and some of the weapons that you guys have now, brought in into that room, I think is going to be impressive with our secondary, quite frankly, and how we hold up against scramble drill. I think the one thing where we really kind of got gashed a little bit was the quarterback run game last week. Now that also, we didn't make too many adjustments. We ended up throwing Ethan Burke in there as a spy just to make things interesting in the second half. But that is something to be interested in, because Bryce Young did put on tape now that he will take off. He did, like last year, he was more so hesitant, whereas this year he was very, very aggressive, 63-yard run, big chunk yardage runs that, could throw off some of the element there. The other thing I wanted to mention, I appreciate y'all. Yes, definitely hit the like button, subscribe, a whole bit. Y'all know what the attendance is. But the other thing I wanted to mention was, in regards to the secondary matchups and in terms of these guys and throwing out disguise looks or things of that sort, that's where, we know what coverage we're going to run, but showing a different look, because he does a lot pre-snap for a college quarterback. And I see the bluff things, right? And all this type of stuff. So really interested to see that mental battle between the two. Now, the other thing I want to move to, Jahmyr Gibbs looked good to me last week. And I really, really like how you guys are probably going to also continue to utilize him in the passing game the same way Jason McCollum was utilized and Williams. That to me is something where I'm really concerned as a Texas fan personally. Not really inside run. I feel good about T. Sweat and Coburn and Byron Murphy, who you mentioned earlier. Where I get a little worried is actually more of screen game. Some of the things where you guys will be able to get Jahmyr Gibbs out into space. Very, very explosive player. I don't know if you want to speak to any of the Bama run game stuff.
Yeah, I would love for us to, to really test out to see if you got the speed to kind of handle us on the outside. That's some of the things that I would love to see. I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but we struggle with those inside stunts when we try to run some inside zone. And, that's something that was a little concerning. Wasn't that too concerning, because you saw when Jahmyr Gibbs actually has a little bit of a crease, he can take it off like he did with a 58-yard run in Utah State. But, it's something that for the most part, I would love to see a little bit more consistent. Because is it because of missed assignments, or is it because we lost our one-on-one battles where what's as far as physicality, did we get a little bit better? Is this something that should be a little bit of a concern for us? And just looking at the game from last night, that we did struggle with some physicality, which is a little concerning to me. But for the most part, I just, for me, I would just rather just miss assignments because that's something that we can coach up. That's something that we can clean. You can't teach physicality, like you just can't. And that was something that was a little bit of concern for me. So I would love for honestly to see, how can we get the ball in open space, right? Jameer Gibbs, Jason McKellen, Jace before he went down, before he tore his ACL, he was one of our best receiving backs, if not the best receiving back on the team. That was a guy that you could look out to the flat, emergency receiver, guy that can score a touchdown. That's something that I would love to see for us to do a little bit more, include more screen games, include more check downs to the flat if we have to do that. Try to get more of our athletes out into the open spaces and see if we can win those one-on-one battles. But I don't particularly think that if we simply just try to gash, and maybe we could. I think it's a big possibility that we actually can do that. And that's something that I hope that, if we can have Javon Cohen back for this game, or maybe Emil Ikur can take it up to another step. I know personally, Darren Delcourt could be that guy at center, that physical, because he's probably our most physical offensive lineman. But
we've talked about him a lot this offseason.
Yeah. I like him a lot. The biggest issue with Darren Delcourt, and this is why there's still controversy between him and Seth McLaughlin, is his pass blocking ability. That's his weakness. Seth McLaughlin's, if he was starting, his biggest weakness was run blocking. Right? It was its zone. That's his biggest struggle. And pass protection, he's excellent. So if we can find a way to be a little bit more consistent with the inside runs, I think that's where it makes us a little bit more unpredictable, and that's something that I would love to see happen. But that's a key right there, is how can we be a little bit more physical in the offensive line as far as pushing guys like Sweat, like Coburn, like Murphy out the way, so that we can give our athletes those potential open space battles where I'm confident that we can win.
Moving over to the Texas offense versus the Alabama defense, do you and I know we're just jumping back and forth here, but it's been fun. Quinn Ewers, did you get a chance to see how he looked in his first game, or and B, second start, young offensive line, but you also are very familiar with Sark. What Sark is bringing to the table. What do you see from that matchup there with our quarterback?
Yeah, so I saw a little bit of him in action, and as far as his arm talent, is as good as advertised, if not better. That kid has an arm, and that's something that is honestly is threatening for us. Now, of course, he did struggle a little bit that I was able to watch, but for the most part, once he got it going, you saw exactly why he's a 5-star recruit, why he was number one quarterback in his class, why when he reclassified, why he was the number one player in the country. I mean, that kid is uber talented. It's going to be an interesting battle, obviously, because of he's never really and again, and this is probably going to be for the majority of the season. I don't think he's going to face as good as a line as what Alabama's going to offer with obviously with our pass rushing, with our interior pass rushing, which I think will get better. He's not going to see a better matchup than this. So with Quinn, it's going to be very interesting to see how can he handle the pressure, right? Is he going to step up at the right times? How is Sark as far as his ability, right? Is it going to be more of a quick running, run and shoot type of things? It'd be quick, some quick action where we can see, because again, Bama, what we struggled with last week was the inside slants, right? Is it something that Sark can look at the tape and say, maybe this is something that we can maybe capitalize? For the most part, even though Alabama loves to run a lot of man, they're not perfect. Matter of fact, they haven't been perfect in a long time as far as that particular aspect. So is that something that we can maybe punish them in? If what can we do to really back off Alabama's defensive pass rush from coming? Because I don't think that there's anybody on this offensive line for you guys that can block Dallas Turner. I don't think there's anybody that can block Will. I think the inside pass rush is going to get a little bit better with Byron Murphy and maybe Justin Abobi. He actually showcased some pass rushing ability and how good he was in the running department. So I think a big key factor besides, and that's why I say Jatavion Sanders is a huge key factor, because there's nobody, let's be honest, there's nobody on our team right now that can cover, that can cover Jatavion Sanders on those one-on-one routes. I don't think there's anybody, at least from a safety or linebacking perspective, that can cover him. Bijan Robinson, if you guys can utilize him in the open space and use him in the receiving game, I think that maybe can play a little bit into our favor. Now, again, I don't think Bijan Robinson is I think he's a first-round running back. I think he's the best running back in college football. But that's, with obviously getting guys like Henry T, and then obviously with Brian Branch and Kyrie Jackson, that's where That's our biggest strength is the ability to attack in the open field. That's why I love Jatavion Sanders. That's why I'm scared of Jatavion Sanders. Xavier Worthy with his ability to kind of stretch the field. That's something that we kind of, even though we rely a lot on our physicality, that's something where Xavier Worthy can do something. So it's going to be interesting to see how this matchup is going to be played, especially with Sark knowing how good this defensive line will be. And just knowing, again, with Quinn Ewers, especially going against like the ultimate test in week 2, it's going to be interesting to see what happens.
With Quinn, I know he missed on all of the deep stuff, right? And he did miss on some intermediate things. But Jatavion, again, that chemistry there, he seemed to be very timed up. So some of the impressive throws he had, especially, the one down the sea where he's able to layer the ball between the backer and the safety. He looked, that's where it started to get comfortable, and you really see the arm talent there. I totally agree. And the shot stuff, it was more timing and just, rust and nerves and all those things.
Mm-hmm.
I do think he will, if he's able to have time and step into it, because these are also longer developing concepts, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm watching Casey Kane work across the crosser, and there was a play where Quinn, I think it was a 4th down play call. We actually had to go and dump it off to Jatavion Sanders just to get the first down and move his feet a little bit, which I wanted to see him do because you're going to have to move your feet in the pocket against Bama. But that crosser to Casey Kane, those are plays that take 3 seconds, to really, really allow that player to clear. So I'm curious to see how Sark is going to be able to mix that in. And that's where it really comes down to the Texas run game. Bijan Robinson, I think it comes down to the Texas run game, as well as what can Sark try to manipulate with short passing game. Because to me, I think Alabama plays as aggressive at the line of scrimmage from a secondary standpoint all the way across as anybody in the country. It's very NFL-like in terms of not allowing guys just to dink and dunk and give up the short stuff. Now, on empties and things like that, like 4th and 1 against Utah State, quarterback really, to me, misread it and did have that slant where he won on the inside where they went for a 4th and 1 very, very early in your game. So those are opportunities where we could maybe have some quick hitters and turn into explosive plays. But I think in order to open up that underneath stuff, we're going to have to be able to run the football with Bijan. We're going to have to be able to move those backers back with a Jatavion Sanders and a guy like a Jordan Whittington, because I could see a situation where we're trying to hit on some of our bubbles, some of our underneath stuff. Casey Kane, who's being mentioned, had one where he was able to make a guy miss and get upfield. Bama really doesn't typically give those type of plays up. And so that's where my concern kind of comes in terms of, are we going to be able to establish our run game? We tried to go with Junior Angulau at center to generate as much strength and power on the interior so we could, be able to run our inside zone and get dirty yards. We're now back with Jake Majors at center. He was great with communication last week, and he's the elder statesman in terms of knowing where to go and how to really help the young guys. So there's benefit there. But, he has an issue with power, and he has an issue with really being able to move and help with double teams. So I'm curious to see if we're able to, whether it's Bijan or Roschon Johnson, who is just as equipped from an inside zone perspective, how we're able to utilize our run game to help Quinn out. Because I thought that our staff, Quinn only threw the ball 24 times last week. We really, really are built around running the football. So I'm really curious to see how we, how those guys, whether it's running, can you run out of Dallas Turner? Can you run out of Will Anderson? Because I feel like there's could be a misconception there. What say you?
It's going to be interesting. So during the offseason, I said a lot of the things that if you try to run at Roy Anderson, that's what Bama loves to do. That's what Bama actually wants, because that's a lot of people think that, 16 and a half, 17 and a half sacks, that's his biggest strength. The biggest strength of Will Anderson is the fact that he can stop the run. He's a phenomenal edge defender that they use in inside stunts. And if you go back and watch the A&M game, if it wasn't for Will Anderson, I think Isaiah Spiller could have had a 200-yard performance. Will Anderson was the direct catalyst to why we held A&M to 70 yards rushing in that game. So he is a very important key piece, and we love to use Will Anderson everywhere on the field if we possibly can, as far as edge rushing situations. So the one particular area that maybe could gash, because we've seen, that maybe can gash them, is the fact is honestly, it is the inside runs. It is between DJ Dell, it's between Jaheim Oates, it's between Justin Agbobi, it's between Byron Young, those Timothy Smith as well. I think that's the one area that you can potentially gash. I think if you try to simply run the outside, that plays into Alabama's strength of what they love to do. That's why they have the linebackers that can run sideline to sideline for. That's honestly why Jalen Moody, I think, is starting now over a player like Deontay Lawson or in some of our other faster guys that normally we would kind of put out there, because Jalen Moody, what he does best is that he can fill in the gaps very easily, and he's a bruiser. He's an old school linebacker, and that's something that we missed really over the last 3 years. We haven't had that guy since Rashaan Evans. Even Shane Lee, who's now with USC at 245 pounds, he actually struggled with that. Now we have that bruising linebacker in Jalen Moody who can actually fill in those gaps, that can fill those responsibilities, because Henry T was supposed to be that guy, but we found out last year he wasn't that guy. He was simply just kind of more of a weak side, silent to silent type of dude. Because when you tried to have him do that last year, what would happen is that he would try to run around the defender. He would try to use different ways, and it would create these big gaps. And that's how, when Florida had over 300 yards rushing against us, that's how when LSU had over 150 yards rushing against us in that particular game. That's why Georgia in the second half, when they kind of did their thing, that was one of the biggest reasons, because they had a guy in Amarius Mims start at left guard, and they push Jamari Slayer. I'm sorry, they pushed a Slayer out at guard, pushed out Mims at right tackle, and Slayer just killed Bogby and Timothy Smith out the way. Linebackers didn't really fill in the gaps, and that's why Georgia was turning out 8-9 yard runs in that second half, which you can make an argument was one of the biggest reasons why the momentum swung in their favor. So that is something that's going to be interesting. I think that's the one key of area success that you guys have to do. You guys have to test out Timothy Smith, test out DJ Dale. Jaheim Oates is going to be playing a lot. He's kind of more of a co-starter with DJ Dale at nose. Test them out to see which can you do. Can you bring, right, as far as those run stunts, right? Can you make Will Anderson slide in there a little bit? Because maybe in a way you can try to challenge them to the outside a little bit if you can make Will Anderson commit inside. So that's one of those areas that I'm very interested in seeing.
And I think some of the stuff you saw Texas run last week, you're also gonna see two back sets in this game. Texas actually started running a lot of two back in the second half against ULM. So the manipulation, right? Because again, the playbook is the playbook, guys. It's just what window dressing I put on the play. We're all trying to run inside zone, or in some cases get to the outside, but the window dressing I put on it in terms of a orbit motion or a jet motion to identify something or give you the idea that I'm going to play action and see if it's man and try to get it out there in space, right? Like, and with guys run upfield. And I think Texas last week did a great job. Guys like Casey Kane, guys like Milton, even, who were able to get upfield and really run block, even though these are like more swing passes and generating space. Those are things that I think, Alabama's going to try to take away. So you have to be able to have the counter there of actually getting gash yards and chunk. Gashing them to get chunk yards in between the tackles. That has to be the counter to that. Because if you allow somebody to shut that down, or we're ineffective there, it starts becoming 1st and 10 and it's 2nd and 7 or 2nd and 8. And, now we're not going to bluff at your motion anymore. We are going to cover that. That's tough sledding for a quarterback to sustain over an entire game. You have to be able. Now, last week we got everything, but against Bama, it's Nick Saban, guys like Saban, Belichick, whatever. They want to make you play football left-handed.
Yeah, it's not going to be easy.
That's probably the biggest thing I'm excited to see, though, is Sark, Saban, in the chess that goes back and forth, really with personnel, and groupings, because we actually did show quite a bit of diversity with the personnel packages and trying to find those matchups. We're well aware. I mean, at this point, depth charts are not. I know we talked about it earlier, and we're getting ready to wrap up here as we get more out there for you guys. But the whole depth chart thing of, who's out there and all that type of stuff. Well, both sides are aware of the manipulation there too.
Yeah.
Secondary wise, we played a whole bunch of people last week. So, Jalen Gilbo came on, JD Coffey's out there. We have all these guys, coming in and out and whatnot. So I think the hidden unknown is not necessarily the plays. It may be the personnel and the players and who's out there and who's, we know what coverage you guys will run on Zay, but who's in the coverage, who's in the action. I think to me, that's the unknown.
Yeah, and it's like is it going to be Kyrie Jackson? I mean, we saw Kyrie Jackson make plays yesterday, especially in the running game. Is it going to be Eli Ricks? Is it going to be? We don't know because they're co-starters, and those guys in every single series they would switch in and switch out. So until we actually get the actual official depth chart, which I don't think won't be released until maybe the start of the game, we actually have no idea. Now I do believe that we have the players that I think could maybe slow down Zay. I don't think we have any player that can guard him one-on-one, but I do believe that we have the potential of maybe slowing him down a little bit. I do like our safety. I do like our safeties, more particularly with Jordan Battle and his ability to cover field from sideline to sideline with his speed and with just how well he's improved his coverage abilities. But it's gonna be an interesting one. It's gonna be a very interesting one because I would say Zay and definitely Jatavion Sanders are the biggest threats that I would consider from the receiving ground. Now, if Nair was healthy, that's where I actually would be a little bit more worried because I've watched him since Wyoming. I've watched Nair for a long time, and that dude with his size and his wingspan and just his speed, that dude has the potential, if they work him a lot in the slot, to actually make a lot of noise and to present a lot more challenges for our defense. But now that he's gone, and we might see some more, and maybe you can co-sign with this, more Jordan Winnington, some more players that maybe that are definitely going to get into the fold. Maybe potentially a Brandon Thompson. I'm a big fan of Brandon Thompson, by the way, with his speed and stuff like that. But it's going to be interesting. It's going to be very interesting to see.
So, hey, it's okay to agree to disagree. That's perfectly fine. I just want to make sure I'm clear here. I'm not saying that we're not going to throw the kitchen sink. I never said we're not going to throw the kitchen sink at Nick Saban. Yeah. What I'm saying is your plays are your plays, right? Mm-hmm. Like there's going to be wrinkles. There's going to be certain elements, and it can vary. Sometimes it's not the play, it's the tempo. Sometimes you play a team and it's like, we haven't run tempo all year, but for you, we're going to run tempo today, right? The switch up could be reversing a concept. Normally run the smash over here to the field. This week, we're going to run it to the boundary, right? And certain elements like that. And there could be certain plays or things that they're working on, trick plays that you have every week, certain plays that you have for red zone, certain things you have that week directly for your opponent for 2-point conversion. LSU ran that last night against FSU, that they had a play ready to go, which is probably why you're not as likely to go for 2, because you have these plays that your guys can execute at certain levels and certain rates that you prepare. And so with Sark, to me, again, this is execution and managing the game. That's why a lot of people mentioning Ajayi Hall right now. One of Ajayi Hall's strengths that we saw at Alabama and we've seen, or heard about at Texas in practices is underneath drag routes, right? Just getting him the ball in space and allowing him to be a playmaker running up the field with the ball in his hands, right? There's no, now the more he can do, the more we can call, right? So we also have to remember with a young football team and us really filling out our group, the emphasis to me has to be on execution versus, I'm doing all these things to trick Nick Saban. Look, what did A&M run against y'all? Did A&M run anything that surprised you, or were they just balling? Like that to me, correct me if I'm wrong.
They simply just executed. A lot of people like to say, well, they ran a lot of different stuff. They did not. If you go back and actually watch some of the early games to that game, their biggest problems during the season was failure to execute on their certain concepts and plays.
Zach Calzada was right. He was perfect. He was, and he was decisive, right? And he's on time hitting Winnemeyer, on time on third down, on time in the 2-minute drill.
We lost
and they
because
had
we tried something different. Yeah, we tried something different by dropping back Will Anderson and Dallas Turner back. Well, Will Anderson back in coverage more times than that in that particular game. And our secondary, they simply couldn't execute as far as broken down coverages, as far as players as far as them missing their assignments, not being in the right positions at the right particular time. And that the wheel route destroyed us because we couldn't. It was a failure to communicate in the back end of our secondary. We couldn't execute because we tried to do something different and something cute, which after that game, we didn't do. We went back to what we did originally well, and that's what lost us the game. So that's what we did wrong.
I mean, with Quinn, if I'm, Sark, I want to see him get hit. How's he? If we know, hey, there's going to be not just blitzes, certain things that y'all do. Guys like you mentioned, Moody earlier and Braswell, who I mentioned earlier, but also even against that pressure with just the 4 of, don't allowing one negative play or one play where there's a sack. We can't let that turn into a snowball, because I think a lot of teams that play the Bamas, the Georgias of the world, we saw this yesterday with Georgia and Oregon, it can turn into an avalanche where you're just getting dominated and there's nothing you can do, right? Like at the end of the day, it's still a very physical football game played in the trenches, one up front, and that's why Alabama's allowed to play very aggressive man coverage. And so teams like A&M, and A&M had a young line. Fothery was out there, big old boy at center. They had young dudes out there. Now, it was game 6 for them, but those young guys and whatnot, they were on time that night. And if I'm Sark, I want to know how we execute against the physicality. That to me is what I'm looking to see as the key point. Quinn Ewers, when you do have that opportunity, no matter how many times you've been hit, you got to hit that post, right? We got to be on time with that, with Worthy and Jay Witt and whoever else is out there. Let's see here. Any other questions? Anything else you wanted to bring up, Jance? We can go for like 10 more minutes and then we'll wrap, and I'll let you get to enjoying your Labor Day. I appreciate you coming on here, brother.
Oh, yeah, no problem, man. No problem, man. And I guess one of the things that I guess I can touch upon a little bit is our receiving core a little bit more often. Is I want to see those battles between your secondary and ours, as far as scheming wise, as far as developing concepts. I'm very interested to see that particular battle. Again, we don't have a Jamison Williams. I don't even think we have a John Mechie on this team as of yet. I think we have the potential of maybe having players that could be in that caliber. But it's interesting because if even though Bryce Young had a really nice game, he had 100 yards rushing in that game, he had a 98 QBR. He did have some miscues in that game against Utah State, where the continuity between him and Jermaine Burton and some other receivers just quite wasn't there. I know in the red zone that was not really that much of a struggle, but it was something that you could see that, okay, yeah, this is not particularly perfect. Like, this is the difference between the spring and summer camp compared to an on-game situation. Now, you saw Bryce Young; he was smiling every time he missed some of those routes, the crossing routes, the corner routes. You saw him kind of smile when he missed those particular throws because, like, oh yeah, I should have easily had that. But we're not going to be that particular perfect. I think that it's going to take a little bit more time for us to develop. I mean, when I'm trying to, we're going to make mistakes. As far as our receiving and quarterback connection. So, Trayshawn Holden, I don't think he's an impossible receiver to cover. I don't think that, we don't have a Henry Ruggs. We don't have Devontae Smith. We don't have a Jam. We don't have any of those players as of yet. I think we have the potential. Kobe Prentice, loved what I saw from him in the slot. I love what I saw.
Was good.
Yeah, Prentice was really good. Even Isaiah Bond for the limited amount of snaps kind of showed the speed and why he was praised a lot. Kendrick Law. So we saw a lot of our young guys really went out there and play. But it's not impossible to really scheme up and guard our receivers. And so that's something that I'm interested in seeing, because last week, as it showed, we do have a little bit more work to do as far as that as far as building that chemistry in a real life game situation.
I have a question for you. I was going to submit it in the chat, but I'll just ask you straight up. What's the biggest mistake that people make when they face Nick Saban?
They try stuff that they never tried before. Like they implement a lot of stuff that they've just never worked on before, and they try to play either too aggressive or they play too conservative, right? That was the one thing that was, right, quote unquote, when you play Bama, the Bama fear, which, before, literally in the walkout, and you see Alabama and you see their size and you get intimidated like that. That's something that we were known for years, that we take teams out their comfort zone and we make them try different things. So for me personally, like you said earlier, I mean, you simply have to go out there, follow your game plan. Don't do anything too cute, and simply go out there and try to execute, do your best. And, at the end of the day, simply just following the fundamentals, the basic fundamentals of football, and simply executing on those fundamentals can get you a lot. And for us, I've always said it, and I'll say it before, I don't think we're invincible. I personally think that at some point in the season, we will have a loss. I do think we'll go ahead and make the playoffs, and I do think we could potentially have that opportunity to make a national championship. But we do have some holes and weaknesses on our team that I have to potentially get addressed. And it's too early at this point to sit up and say, okay, the offensive line fixed this, or hey, the inside stuff from our defensive line is completely fixed here, or hey, our secondary is completely fixed. We haven't seen that yet because we went up against an inferior opponent in Utah State, which is not a bad team, but we all know Texas is miles ahead better than Utah State right now. So again, for the most part, simply go out there, do your thing, execute, and we'll see what happens.
He said, Peter said, let's try new stuff. Let's say Bijan carried 45. Oh, man. I don't know if anybody's ever had that type of success trying to run on Bama like that.
I don't think it was that many carries.
Oh, man, that's funny. That's funny. No, Jance Sports, guys, make sure y'all follow on, all social media as well as YouTube. Want to make sure we support the content. Jance, you have anything going on this week you want to promote or plug? Or
I guess. So tomorrow, Tuesday, me and my co-host Kari Demos, he works for Fanside and Buffalo Fanatics. We go out there. We're gonna preview some Bills talk, stuff like that tomorrow, some college football recaps. That's at Buffalo Fanbase Sports, which you can follow on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, Spotify. It's all there. We do that every Tuesday at 7:00 Eastern Standard, 6:00 Central Time. If you're on the West Coast, we'll be on the 4:00, but we do it every Tuesday, and I'm excited to kind of get into that.
Thank you for plugging that in. And also, NFL this week, guys.
Yeah.
Opening week, got Bills, Rams on Thursday night. So, shout out to the sponsor, busr.com/fanatic, promo code sports100FP. Take advantage, get in your preseason future bets now. Make sure you get in, MVP bets. A lot of people loving Josh Allen this year. A lot of people high on Jonathan Taylor, the Indianapolis Colts. So different things out there. Justin Herbert, can he make it? Can he get his team to the playoffs? A lot to take advantage of on busr.com/fanatic. Great customer service. They'll stay with you, help you out. When you're betting with somebody, you want to bet with somebody reliable. So that's why I promote these guys, and they do a great job each and every time you interact with them, as well as all the college football things. Right now, what's the line right now? I always ask this question.
Texas game or for NFL?
Texas, Bama. What's the line right now?
Last time it was like 18.5. It was minus 18.5.
18.5.
So it might have gone up a little bit. I have to check it again, but last time I saw it was like 18.5 right now.
Yes, early in the week, you feeling like it's a cover for Bama, or are we waiting later this week for predictions?
I'm gonna wait a little bit. I listen. If for anyone that's followed my channel, I never sit up here and say that Alabama's gonna blow anybody out, because the last time I keep saying that, we lost, which was to Auburn back in 2017, and so I never sit up here and say I never try to underestimate an opponent. I always try to look at what's our weaknesses, what's their weaknesses, what's our biggest strengths, what's their biggest strengths, and I literally will wait until literally probably the start of the game to sit up and say, okay, yeah, we can possibly blow somebody out here. But yeah, it's interesting. Personally, for me, I'm gonna wait. I'm gonna do some more research. I'm gonna look at the games, and then maybe I'll take a bet or something. But yeah,
we're at 20 and a half. A lot of folks mentioning here. I think it's something where we, that in itself, we talk about motivation, whatnot.
That could be motivation. Yeah.
I do think because Bama looked so crazy dominant week one, I think that's influenced this a little bit. There was a question earlier that I wanted to get back to while we're still chit-chatting here a little bit. Um, I'll go for another 5 minutes if you got it in your Jance. Um, there's still 357 in here, which is awesome, in the middle of the day. So make sure you guys, again, hit that like button. Make sure y'all go subscribe to Jance Sports and all the work and media he's doing. Why did Bryce Young run so much last week? Was that intentional?
That's a good question. Because for the most part, and even this is going all the way back to modern day, he's a quarterback that if he has no choice but to run, that's when he'll do it. But I mean, he'll try to hold to that ball and scan the field as much as possible. And that's back when he was at modern day and he's playing against DJ Uiagalelei and he had all those players back there. But I personally think for me, I think our coaching staff, whether it's Bill O'Brien, whether it's Nick Saban, I think they talk to Bryce and say, listen, if you see an opportunity, go ahead and take it. Don't try to hold on to the ball as much as possible. I understand that, you want to try to scan the field. If you see a lane and if you see 15, 20 yards of open space, take it. And that was one of the things that last year, that's what a lot of Bama fans were begging him to do. They're literally 25, 30 yards of open grass, take it because you got speed, you got the athleticism. Do it. But he's just one of those guys that it's just built into his psyche to just hold on to that ball, scan as much as possible, give his receivers the opportunity, and he'll find out and take it. Even in the Utah State game, as many times he took off, there were times where he had the lanes that he could have took off for like 10, 15 yards, decided to kind of hold on for the ball a little bit, and he took a sack. So yeah, I mean, he's still doing it a little bit, but I think that for this year, I think we're going to see a lot of Bryce Young take it off.
My boy said he's trying to win that back-to-back Heisman, baby. You got to put them numbers up. I have said for Bryce in particular, now it's going to be interesting because I think he's with Stroud and them really wrestling with, they're going to have to kind of put up some numbers to get back into it if you're talking Heisman. But I've always felt like Bryce Young this year is going to be graded on a different scale because they don't really like to give that award out to the same person twice.
Yeah.
They really, really, really don't. And so in order to win it twice, you're going to have to do something, pretty dynamic, pretty insane. So if you start having some of those numbers, whatnot. Now, I think it's with the intention of the more we can do, the more explosive we are. And as long as I'm being responsible as a runner, there's nothing wrong with picking up that additional yardage, still working in young guys. Blah, blah. But I think it's very, very interesting, overall when we look at the outside things like Heisman and, awards and NFL draft picks and all these type of things. So that's the other thing for Texas guys, right? The NFL eyeballs. We talk about player development. We talk about showcasing our guys. There's no better opportunity, no better team we want to go against to have that showcase. This game matters a lot for Deshaun Jameson, for DeMarvion Overshown, for, guys that are trying to, they feel like they have any type of potential NFL aspirations. This Bama tape, in years past when we've played big games like this, the NFL draft shows up and they show Jamar Chase freaking our guys and Justin Jefferson running away from our people. I want to have that on the other end, right? In terms of our guys, see DeMarvion go out there making plays on Jahmyr Gibbs and Bryce Young and getting after it. So showcase game as well. And one other thing too, SEC ramifications. Does that play into this at all, storyline wise for you, Jance, in terms of Texas coming on board?
Yeah, because if Texas wins this game, everyone is going to clown the SEC. Everyone's going to clown it. Everyone's going to get after Bama. Like, you know how this works. When Bama loses, it's headlines for about a week, sometimes two. People still play the kick six game to this day, and I want that to be out my memory, but it still gets played. So if Texas win this game, it's going to be one of the biggest upsets of the year, if not the biggest upset of the year. So I definitely think that this does have something to play. Maybe this is something that could be a little motivating. I don't think it's going to be, the direct catalyst for motivation, but you know how players are. They follow social media, they follow the headlines, they read the news articles out there, and I do believe that this could be some sort of motivation for them, especially because it's week 2. It is an 11 a.m. kickoff, which is weird. it's something that, you know, as far as primetime games, we haven't had happen in a long time. It's, you know, so, you know, it's going to be interesting. I really wish this could be
That's
a night.
why we're leaving, bro.
Yeah.
One of the reasons.
I really wish this could be a night game, man. But it's well, I definitely think it definitely has something to play, and maybe that could be a little use of motivation for Bama.
So the you know, it's funny you bring up the element and kickoff in there too, but with the conferences, Texas being a Big 12 school as of right now, and we know, and I'm gonna save the 2009 stuff for later this week. I'm not even going there right now, but I will say this: what is Saban's non-conference record? I mean, when these losses have occurred, correct me if I'm wrong, they've been SEC loss. I mean, who's been able to touch Saban in a non-conference big game matchup?
In a non-conference big game, so like besides the playoffs, besides playoffs and national championship games, we really haven't lost in the Nick Saban era. We really haven't. I'm trying to think. I'm trying to think. Oklahoma State. That I remember Oklahoma State. We did lose to them. But besides that, and ULM, I guess we can say Louisiana Monroe counts as one. We haven't lost. No, we haven't really lost that many non-con. I mean, we beat Virginia Tech. That was in 08, 2000. In 08 we beat Clemson. Michigan, we destroyed them. Wisconsin. I mean, yeah, we haven't really lost a lot of non-con games.
I bring this up because we have a chance for history, guys. I mean, not like history outright, like you mentioned ULM and some of the other ones, but it's been a minute. I'm gonna have to go back and really look that up because I feel like it's been over a decade since y'all lost a regular non-con game, like if at all. I mean, unless somebody has that right away in the chat. Been thinking about that.
I can remember at the top of my head, I was either in the second or the third grade the last time we lost to a non-conference opponent. I'm now 24, so it's been a while. It's been a while.
Hey, time for us. There we go, Paxton. Right on time. Right on time, Paxton. It's time to shock the world, right? But I like to know what I'm up against because, when you're betting responsibly at BUSR, we want to make sure we've done our homework and we understand trends. We understand what's going on. So one more time, hit up, guys, BSR.com/fanatic. Official sponsor, official sportsbook, official betting partner, Fanatic Perspective. Okay, I wanted to give y'all 5 more minutes, but now we got to bounce. Jance, thank you for coming on, brother. Make sure you guys hit up Jance Sports. Jance, I want to have you on one more time before Saturday, if you don't mind.
Oh, yeah, go ahead. Yeah,
I'm this week because it's a lot to dive into, especially as more storylines continue to unfold and dive into. Guys, make sure y'all hit that like and subscribe button for us, too. It's free to show love. We appreciate y'all. For my Horns fans out there, Horns always up. Love y'all. We out of here, baby.